Yeah, the educational achievement and income inequality based on China's economic and educational data from 1988, 1978 to 2022. So first, I want to give a brief introduction. The research content is about since the reform and opening up in China, the differences and the influencing factors of enrollment paths of Chinese urban and rural residents at the three educational levels of junior, middle school, senior high school, and university. And the key elements including the diversion of admission paths, influencing factors caused by two major education systems, including the key schools policy and tracking policy, and also the structure and characteristics of unequal educational opportunities in China at this stage. And the method of this research is based on intensive secondary data analysis and fieldwork observations in Chinese context. Firstly is the literature review. Here are some key policies reform in educational stratification in China. The first one is the reform and opening up policy since 1978. It gives a transformation from a single public ownership economy to the economy with public ownership as the main body and the multiple ownership for common development. Also, it emphasizes modernization, industrialization, and urbanization, so which leads to the class gap of Chinese residents' access to education has shown a widening trend in this market-oriented reform. And the second policy is the massification of higher education since 2010, and which leads to the increase of China's total educational opportunities, which did not lead to a significant decline in the degree of educational inequality as scheduled, or even an upward trend. So let's say that for important stages after the reform and opening up policy in China in the education trend. So the first stage, the nation bring the order for the education management, and the second stage in the 1990s, which gives the comprehensive education system reform. And the third stage is the economic period of educational development, which emphasizes the industrialization and the marketization, which should be facilitated by education and talent cultivation in China. And the final stage, the fourth stage, from the 2003 until today, is emphasizing the scientific values on development and promote the educational equity, and also bring about a new period of education for the future. So we should notably for the fourth stage, which shows an idea of simply pursuing the economic growth, has been questioned, and criticized the idea of industrialization in a high-profile way, and also focuses on the problem of rural compulsory education and educational equity. So the second part is about the comparative analysis, data analysis, and the research findings, which is regarding the four challenges in Chinese education reform after the reform and opening up policy. The first problem is the massification of higher education in China, regarding the division system, including the key school and tracking policy. The unequal educational opportunities can be shown in the key school policy, which means since the founding of PRC, in order to cultivate scientific and technological talents urgently needed for the industrialization and modernization, the country set up the key school policy to concentrate the scarce educational resources on excellent talents. So it leads to the uneven distribution of educational resources, students, and teachers, and destroys the normal social mobility mechanism, and finally becomes an institutional setting for class solidification or increasing social polarization. And the key middle schools have this group of key middle schools, they have stronger teachers, larger funding and allocation, more learning and exchange opportunities with better environment, and ensure that students they can win in follow-up education and entrance examination for the higher education. And the second policy for the unequal education is tracking. So this means the country divides the high school education into academic and vocational education, and also divide the higher education into the similar formal undergraduate study and vocational high school study, which can also be regarded as junior college. So it is the second tier education with poorer quality than the formal higher education. So this kind of tracking leads to the academic talents and elites cultivation distinguished from technician cultivation for labor markets. So the China's policy for the vocational tracking shows that a structure of secondary education solidified in vocational and technical education and distinguished from the academic trend, elite cultivation. So from this picture, we can see that the vocational college can stand on this level, and this is the top level, the first to the top universities in China, and then the formal universities in the first group, the formal universities in the second group, and then the vocational college means to a level less than the bachelor degree, but higher than the high school study level. So I would like to give a comparative analysis about the tracking system in the UK, which is also similar to China with the sponsored mobility, which means that they select the elite candidates in the early stage and give them better social resources in the primary education and high school education, so that they could be more competitive to apply for a better university. But in America, they propose a different education policy, which means the context mobility, which means that all the people that have got equal education opportunities in the K-12 education, and after the K-12 education, the students they compete equally for the better higher education, depends on their competence. So their education resources are similar to each other before in front of the higher education. So, and the second problem in China is massification of higher education with the quantity and the quality dilemma. So from this picture, we can see that the enrollment of the college and secondary vocational education and high school are always increase per year. But we can say that this is the outcome of the massification of higher education in China. But actually, the increased amount of the enrollment in higher education, they are concentrated in the vocational university or the second tier or the third tier universities, but not the world-class universities in China. So the massification only increased focuses on increasing the amount of the admission students, but they did not enlarge the admission amount or the scale of the top universities in China. Also, we can notice that the secondary vocational education plays an important role in the society, but it still faces the challenge of income level and social reputation recognition. So the massification of higher education shows a theory of the effectively maintained inequality, which means that the quantitative achievement means the overall access to education distinguished from the qualitative quality of education with the key school, and distinguished from the vocational track for the upward mobility. And what factors affect the choice of tracking? So this is closely related to the class stratification and economic stratification in China. According to the Weber stratification theory, we can notice that the reputation is an important factor, which gives less recognition from the society for the vocational tracking. And especially in the neoliberalism higher education, we usually judge the students by competition achievements. So the vocational education is not respected enough in Chinese higher education now. And the third problem is governance education investment. The Chinese government's education expenditure is increasing each year by year, but there is also some from this picture but there is also some gap between the China and some advanced countries, just like the US. In the US, the education support is about stably increase every year in the 5% of GDP since 1969. But in China, it is only about 4% each year for the growth of the GDP. And also the fourth question is the household income and tuition fee pressure. From this table, we can see that 90% of people in Chinese society, they earn a monthly income of less than 5,000 yuan until the 2019, and only about 5% people they earn a monthly income of more than 10,000 yuan each month until 2019. And notably, in contrast with the heavy tuition fee pressure in China, in 1990, the average tuition fee in higher education per year is only 200 RMB. But in 2008, the average tuition fee per year in university is 6,000 RMB, which means that for a normal farmer family in China's interior area, they should work for 3.5 years of income to calculate it to support children for his or her 4-year higher education tuition fee. And finally, I'd like to give some discussions and proposals. The first proposal is the state regulates the secondary distribution of income, and also to support more social welfare, especially for the whole citizens and the rural citizens. And the second proposal is rural revitalization should be further promoted. And the third is the talent cultivation in higher education should fit the need of transformative industries and labor market skills. Finally, is to increase investment in education in the Western region, which are less developed in China. And the future research to focus on the higher education admission in different levels of universities and top job attainment rate, and also the university graduates entry level wage to the labor market, and eventually upward social mobility of different socio-economic classes graduates. However, fortunately, we should notice that according to the human capital theory, there is still a bright future for China's mass higher education, because when other things being equal, raising participation in higher education will initially increase inequality as rates of return rise, and then it will reduce inequality as expansion reaches mass levels and rates of return decline. And so China is still in the initial stage of the mass higher education, but in the future, the inequality will be reduced, and the mass higher education will facilitate the equality of social stratification and provide more opportunities for upward social mobility in the future. And that's all my contents, and thanks so much for your attention. And if you are also interested in Chinese higher education or the international comparative higher education, please contact with me via the email and telephone. Thank you so much for your attention.